What is up, everybody, and welcome to the most average watch channel on YouTube. Only kidding, we've over 100 subscribers now, so we're kind of a big deal. In today's episode of Talking Watches with Owen, I'm going to discuss 4 watches that you probably don't know about that show Rolex at their best. I'm really excited about this one, so please wait until the end where I'm going to wrap it all up and give you my opinion on the end of Rolex. No point waiting around, roll that intro. First up, we have a hand-wound watch with a jump hour complication in the beautiful Art Deco style. When you see this watch, it doesn't really scream Rolex, but that's exactly the charm of the Railway Prince, reference 1571. The Prince dates back to the early 1930s, the same time that gave rise to the Oyster case, which explains why this piece never really rose to the same level of fame as some of his siblings of the same era. With the Oyster Perpetual taking all the limelight, the Rolex Prince range really just faded away in the 1940s, which is a huge shame. Rolex really knew they were onto a winner with their new waterproof Oyster cases, and even up to today, they're still stuck in that frame of mind, which is a real shame as the Prince was watch design at its best. At the time, rectangular watches were a symbol of modern design as it moved away from the whole idea of watches having to look like pocket watches. With its subtle second hand and high level of accuracy, the Prince was a huge success with the medical profession and was often referred to as the doctor's watch. And as always, this is great marketing by Rolex. The Rolex Prince was re-released in 2005 under the Cellini collection, but lost its Art Deco charm and never really amounted to much. The next watch is a bit different, but it does say a lot about Rolex at the time. I guess it isn't even a Rolex, to be honest. Panerai, the brand that is known for its big watches that have looked the same for over 100 years, once developed the reference 3646 in collaboration with Rolex in the early 1940s. The watch was for the Royal Italian Navy, and in particular for their frogmen, who needed a reliable and legible watch to wear during their long and deep dives. Rolex provided their caliber 618, which ensured precision timekeeping and also helped with the initial waterproofing of the case by having the Type B produced under the Oyster Watch Company. A number of examples can be found with the movement and dial stamped Rolex, so this brings you to the main question: is it a Rolex? I'll leave that one up to you to make the decision. However, this does show at the time Rolex were the king of watch design and manufacturing, something that I feel like they are slowly losing. Next up, we have the 6062 that made its debut at Baselworld in 1950. The reference 6062 was the first automatic triple calendar moon phase watch in a waterproof Oyster case. Considering the date just debuted in 1945, this watch was pretty advanced watch for Rolex at the time. The 6062 managed to marry a high-end complication with a sporty waterproof Oyster case, all while maintaining that everyday wearability that Rolex is known for. To me, this is Rolex at its best. With the 6062, they managed to create a watch that could compete with any watch. In today's market, we are so fascinated with putting a watch into a category like it has to be a dress watch or a dive watch. There's no room for watches crossing borders, but the 6062 can really tick off every box possible. The watch is cased in a 36mm Oyster case with screw down case back, and I 100% agree with Rolex relying on the Oyster case. But what really impresses me about the 6062 is Rolex took the case one step further and used a caliber 655 that included a moon phase and also a day, date and month display. In recent decades, I feel that Rolex has lost a lot of that sense of adventure and trying new complications in their Oyster case lines. As you probably guess, I'm a huge fan of the watch, and my favourite watch ever produced is a variation of the reference 6062, and to me, this is what perfection really looks like in a watch. And finally, we have the reference 4768, and can we just take a minute to appreciate them lugs? Back when Rolex actually cared about design. Please go to the Rolex website and just take a look at all the models they offer, ladies, men's, everything, and show me one model that lugs design is any different from the rest. It really is a shame. So now let's get back to the glory days and the reference 4768. The watch was launched in 1947 and only 220 examples were ever made. Housed inside is the most reliable Vacheron 72C movement, which is fitted in some of today's most desirable models ever created by Rolex. The watch itself is a chronograph with a 30 minutes and 12-hour counter, a full calendar with a day hand, and windows at 12 to display the day and month. For a dial that contains so much, the layout is so clean and so symmetric. With a case size of 35mm, added to the oversized teardrop lugs, I say this watch wears so well. So you're probably asking yourself, how is this the end of Rolex? Last year alone they sold over 800,000 watches. First you have to ask yourself, why are Rolex where they are now? It's not because of what they did in the last 10 or 20 years. Rolex are where they are because of the development and innovation they showed in the 20s, 30s, 40s, etc. The reason I highlighted the 4 watches before is that they were game changers, watches that were right on the cutting edge of design and development. The reason why you bought an Oyster watch in the 1920s was because there was no other option. Rolex were 10 steps ahead on everything. Can that really be said today? Could it even be said that Rolex are 10 steps behind the cutting edge of watchmaking and design? In my opinion, Rolex has been sitting still since the 90s, and it can only last so long. When you ask a man in his 50s who wears a Rolex, he will tell you James Bond. If you ask someone in their 30s, they will tell you a golfer or a famous tennis player. If you ask a teenager, they'll probably tell you a YouTuber who jumps out of wardrobes to scare their parents. I'm not saying Rolex will disappear anytime soon, and the name itself is associated with success, but I do feel that if they don't reinvent themselves and go back to what made them the brand they are today, I really do think they'll be playing with fire. My biggest fear for Rolex is that in 20 years time the lineup will still look the same, and unfortunately I can see this happening. Then add to that the waiting lists, the ADs picking and choosing who they want to sell watches to. I really do feel like Rolex are at a major fork in the road at this moment, and I really do hope that they choose the right one. Once again, I want to thank you for waiting around to the end. I really enjoyed making this video. I know you probably have thoughts on the subject, so please put them in the comments below. I will answer all of them. And finally, please subscribe, as the more subscribers, the more time I can put into the channel, and this will only lead to better content. So as always, enjoy your weekend, and I'll see you the next time.